Linux Mint 22.3 boots off of Linux 6.14. That is the number you need to remember, because if you bought a laptop or a PC with components that went on sale after 6.14 was released, your compatibility is going to be patchy. We are talking about a system that is essentially fixed at the kernel version it had when it was built. If your hardware is newer than the code, the OS is basically guessing how to talk to your machine. It's a silent failure that has been happening behind the scenes for anyone trying to stay on the cutting edge while using a distro that prides itself on stability. The problem here is the development cycle. Linux Mint's switch to a longer development cycle means the next release is coming at Christmas. For most people, that's fine, but for the person who just dropped $2,000 on a new rig today, waiting until December for basic hardware support is a joke. It has a knock-on effect. You try to install the OS and things just don't work right because the kernel is too old to recognize your Wi-Fi card or your GPU. You're left with a system that feels broken out of the box because the software is living in the past. So a solution has been found, or rather a band-aid has been applied. They are calling them HWE ISOs, Hardware Enablement Images. Linux Mint project lead Clement Lefebvre says these were published to address compatibility issues with brand new hardware. It's an admission that the standard version simply isn't enough anymore. The new Linux 22.3 HWE image contains the Linux 6.117 kernel. They are jumping from 6.14 to 6.17 just to keep the lights on for newer PCs. Right now, the HWE ISO uses Linux 6.17 because it rolled out in the Ubuntu 24.04 HWE earlier this year. But even that is already becoming outdated. There is going to be a new HWE ISO with Linux 7.0 published in the summer when the Ubuntu 24.04.5 HWE stack is scheduled to roll out. Think about that for a second. You are constantly chasing a version number just to make sure your keyboard or your screen works properly. It's a cycle of playing catch-up because the main version of the OS is stuck in a long-term freeze. If you're finding this breakdown of tech failures useful, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive into how these systems actually work behind the marketing. The reality is that these are not new releases of Linux Mint per se. It is simply the current version with a newer kernel bundled in. If you have an existing install, the team claims you aren't missing out on anything since you get Ubuntu's HWE stack delivered as a software update. But that only helps if you can get the OS installed and running in the first place. For the new guy trying to join the community with a fresh PC, the standard download is a trap. It's a messy way to handle hardware. Instead of having one OS that just works, we now have the stable version for old tech and the HWE version for the new stuff. It creates a split experience. If you download the wrong one, you're going to have a bad time. And most casual users aren't going to know the difference between kernel 6.14 and 6.17 until their computer starts acting like it's from 2010. The team says they will, from this point on, publish new HWE ISOs each time a new HWE kernel arrives in the distro itself. They are committing to this fragmented path because the main development cycle is too slow to keep up with how fast companies are pumping out new hardware. This move shows a project struggling to stay relevant for modern users while clinging to a slow release schedule that worked 5 years ago but feels like a weight around its neck today. The summer update with Linux 7.0 is supposed to be the big fix, but that leads to a much bigger question about where the core of this operating system is actually heading. But even with Linux 7.0 on the horizon, the way Mint handles these updates reveals a deeper dependency on Ubuntu's timeline that most users don't realize. Right now, the HWE ISO uses Linux 6.117 because it rolled out in the Ubuntu 24.04.4 HWE earlier this year, and there'll be a new HWE ISO with Linux 7.0 published in the summer when the Ubuntu 24.04.5 HWE stack is scheduled to roll out. If Ubuntu is late, Mint is late. If Ubuntu's kernel has a bug, Mint's fix for your new hardware has a bug. You aren't just using Mint. You are waiting on a middleman to give you the tools to actually use the computer you paid for. It's like buying a car, but being told you can only drive on certain roads once a specific construction company decides to pave them. Clement Lefebvre, the project lead, basically admitted that the standard ISO is fixed at the kernel version it had when it was built. If you download Linux Mint 22.33, it boots off of Linux 6.14. Think about how many laptops have come out since that kernel was finalized. Every single one of those users is potentially walking into a patchy experience. That word patchy is tech speak for it might crash, your battery might die in an hour, or your screen might flicker until you want to throw it out a window. This is the drama of the long development cycle. They want to be stable, but the world moves too fast for them. The solution is to offer these separate HWE hardware enablement images to address compatibility issues with brand new hardware. But why is this a separate download? Why is the standard version allowed to be broken for new users? It's a failure of the system's core design. They are forcing you to be an investigator just to find the right download button. If you're planning to install Linux Mint 22.3 on newer hardware or running into compatibility issues, then download the HWE ISO instead of the standard one. If you're tired of these companies making things more complicated than they need to be, make sure you're subscribed. We keep track of these silent changes so you don't have to waste your weekend fixing a broken install. However, these are not new releases of Linux Mint per se, simply the current version with a newer kernel bundled in. They want to make sure you know it's not a new OS, just the old one with a fresh engine. If you have an existing install, you aren't missing out on anything since you get Ubuntu's HWE stack delivered as a software update. That sounds nice on paper, but it doesn't help the person whose current kernel is so old it won't even connect to the internet to download that update. It's a chicken and egg problem that big tech loves to ignore. You need the update to fix the hardware, but you need the hardware to work to get the update. This entire situation is a red flag for how stable distros are handling the modern pace of hardware releases. They are sticking to old ways, while the components inside your laptop are screaming for something newer than 6.14 tune. It's a mess, and the HWE ISO is just the project's way of saying they can't keep up with the main version anymore. The team will, from this point on, publish new HWE ISOs each time a new HWE kernel arrives in the distro itself. This means the Mint website is about to get a lot more confusing. You'll have the main version, the HWE version, and probably a future version all sitting there. For an OS that is supposed to be the easy alternative to Windows, this looks a lot like the fragmentation we see in systems that are falling apart. They are trying to patch a sinking ship with newer kernels, but the ship is still tied to a release schedule that thinks waiting until Christmas for an update is acceptable. The shift to these HWE images also reveals exactly what the Linux Mint team thinks about the standard user versus the power user, and the gap between them is widening. This divide between the standard version and the HWE version isn't just about kernels, it's about a project that is starting to split in two, just to survive. This divide between the standard version and the HWE version isn't just about kernels, it's about a project that is starting to split in two just to survive. By creating these special ISOs to address compatibility issues with brand new hardware, the Mint team is admitting that their stable brand is becoming a liability for anyone with a modern computer. They are essentially telling you that the version they spent months polishing is already obsolete the moment you buy a new laptop. Clement Leffer says the new Linux 22.3 HWE image contains the Linux 6.117 kernel, and they will keep publishing these every time a new HWE kernel arrives. This sounds like a win, but it's a security and stability nightmare for the average person. If you are a grade 9 student or just someone who wants to browse the web, you shouldn't have to check a hardware enablement page to see if your mouse will work. The standard version is fixed at Linux 6.114, and if your PC has components that went on sale after that, your experience will be patchy. That's a polite way of saying your system is cooked. It's a failure of communication. Most people go to the download page, click the big button, and hope for the best. They don't know that right now, the HWE ISO uses Linux 6.17 because it rolled out in the Ubuntu 24.04 HWE earlier this year. They don't know that a new one with Linux 7.0 is coming in the summer. They just know their computer feels slow or buggy. This solution of having two different versions of the same OS is just big tech's way of shifting the work onto you. Instead of them making the OS modern, they make you choose which level of modern you need. My stance? This move helps the friend who knows where to look, but it hurts everyone else. It's a band-aid on a deep wound caused by a slow development cycle. If the next release is coming at Christmas and it's only May, you are stuck in a waiting room for 6 months. If you're already running Mint, you get these updates delivered as a software update, so you aren't missing out. But that's small comfort for the guy whose Wi-Fi driver isn't in the 6.14 kernel and can't get online to update in the first place. This is the state of stable Linux in 2026. You're either running old code on old hardware, or you're chasing HWE ISOs like a detective just to get your Bluetooth to turn on. It's a cycle of frustration that most people aren't ready for. What do you think about this split? Is Mint actually becoming more user-friendly by adding more download options, or is this just proof that their main release schedule is failing to keep up with the real world?